Alright, hello and welcome, or perhaps welcome back to yet another follow-up review and commentary of the Mode1 Retro 2 Android flip phone. Unique, fun little device from Japan. This is in fact now a third video entry into what has become somewhat of a mini-series regarding this interesting device. I've already provided a fairly comprehensive review and a deep dive into this phone throughout the first two videos. So for the most part, I won't be going over everything again. So if you're keen to check out those videos, I will leave links to those videos in this video's description. The main purpose of this video update will be to talk about why I ended the last video by saying that I would not be adopting this phone as my daily device. This was purely in regards to the inconsistent mobile network service that I was struggling with at the time. But I am finally back to share some positive news. Additionally, I will do my best to answer a number of questions that people have been asking since I first released the other videos related to this phone. So to start with, the biggest item on the agenda, the frustratingly inconsistent and unstable mobile service that I was experiencing the last time that we looked at this phone. Thankfully, I can happily say that I no longer have any such issues. After feeling a bit defeated after my early effort with the Mode1 Retro 2, I actually ended up selling that original phone. This led me to purchase an alternative phone, which ended up being the Jin F22 Pro. Not quite sure on the pronunciation. Others online, I believe, have correctly said it as Kin, but forgive me if that is wrong. As I teased at the end of my last video, I was planning to do a full review of this phone, but I will just sum it up fairly quickly here and just cover the main points about perhaps why this was or wasn't the ideal phone for me. In short, it's a groovy phone, not dissimilar to the Mode1 Retro 2. In terms of sufficiently capable hardware and features. Just like the Retro 2, it's not going to be winning any awards for speedy hardware or screen quality. I mean, it's not bad, but it does everything the phone of this relatively budget price should be expected to achieve. Battery's fine, 4G signal was strong, physical buttons work well, but there was one thing that bugged me after using it for a month or two. And really, quite simply, it just wasn't the Mode1 Retro 2. It is a perfectly capable and serviceable phone, but after being spoiled by the Retro 2, its shortcut buttons, handy outer screen, and the fun flip design, plus the fingerprint scanner, which the F22 does not feature, I found myself really missing the Retro 2. I think if I hadn't used this phone first, I'd probably still be happily using the F22 Pro. But again, that's not what happened. So after pining for that phone once again, I decided to bite the bullet and give things another shot, and this time in white. I knew that this was a bit of a gamble, as I previously lucked out with the aforementioned mobile service side of things, which is arguably pretty important when it comes to the requirements of a mobile phone. Despite this, I went ahead and picked up another phone. After receiving the phone and eagerly setting it up for the first use, I set out to test drive it for a few days. And unfortunately, it was still suffering from the same issue of dropping signal for periods of time. Often multiple times a day, and often for durations that wouldn't resolve until restarting the phone. So what's the deal? It can't be two faulty phones. That was a small consideration the first time around, but now I'm confident that wasn't the case. As I did the first time around, I double checked all of the compatible network bands and whatever else that should determine the functionality of this phone over here in Australia. And it all appeared to check out. So after feeling a bit lost, I figured that I would try a different service provider. Up until this point, I had been using the Optus mobile network for years. It had worked perfectly with all my other previous phones, but on the off chance that there was something going on here, I decided to try a provider that utilizes the Telstra mobile network. So for about $5, might have even been $2 or $3, I don't recall, I bought a prepaid Aldi branded starter SIM kit, which operates on the Telstra network. And, yep, that was it. My entire drama was somewhere within the network provider that I'd previously been using. I still don't know what it was exactly, as I was sure that it covered the required 4G bands. But alas, it just would not run consistently under Optus. So with this renewed confidence, I went about finding a good value provider that runs on the Telstra network, as Telstra itself is known to be rather pricey. But thankfully it does have a few sort of sister brands that use that service. And after looking around, doing some research, I ended up going with the Woolworths branded Everyday mobile network. Since then, which has now been about a month or so, I have not had a single network dropout. I get full 4G coverage for anywhere that I've travelled throughout Melbourne and its outer areas. Therefore, I can happily say that I've been rocking this phone as a full-time device since. I am extremely happy to have this phone again, in all of its fun, flippy, clicky, retro-inspired, nostalgic goodness. Also, a related question that I've received numerous times, with Australia having now officially ended all 3G service throughout the country, have I experienced any troubles or changes? Again, no. The date of late September, early October, or whatever it was of this year, 2024, it came and went with absolutely no sign of any trouble whatsoever. So if you're in Australia specifically and are wondering if this phone is safe to use here, yeah, absolutely, yes it is. At least if you're using a service that operates over the Telstra network. Any other provider outside of this, I can't make any guarantees. So with all that excitement out of the way, I'll now touch on some discoveries and other things that I've experienced with now having used this phone for a good little while now. These will be in no particular order of importance. The flippy form factor, whilst first being a bit of a fun feature in itself, also comes with a few unique benefits. With any exterior buttons being only on one edge, which in this case are volume buttons, and the phone being in the fully open position, it forms this subtle V shape, allowing it to prop itself up for hands-free viewing. I mean, not the greatest angle for it, but if it was on a shelf, for example, you can easily stand it up and it's well supported. This is particularly handy for, say for example, watching videos while cooking, killing some time, which allows you to view the phone without the aid of a stand or having to lean it up against something else, which would be typical of all other flat slab phones. And that itself can actually be a bit of a danger, as it can be unstable, things can slip, whatever it's leaning against can fall over if the weight of the phone is a bit too much. So you don't have those precarious situations where the phone itself would flip over at any stage. It is, so long as the surface it's on is sturdy, it's not going anywhere. And the other benefit of the two buttons being on the one side of the phone, unlike many other modern phones that tend to have standby, maybe a function button, volume buttons, sort of spread around different parts of the phone, when you do lean them up, say for example you've got volume on one side, you might wish to toggle the volume, but then that ends up pressing the standby button or something else underneath. So you don't have that problem here, so you have no issues there whatsoever. Next, I wanted to point out the multicolored status LEDs. Might see there, we've got a blue flashing light at the moment. I believe there's blue, red and green for different states. I know that some modern phones still have this feature. I'm pretty sure that it's slowly disappearing though from many of them. This is handy for indicating battery status, missed calls, notifications and such. It will flash a different color for different states. The outside display is also a cool feature to have. Being a flip phone, you don't want to have to open the phone every time you wish to check the time or for notifications or whatever else. From the settings menu, the display can be configured in a couple of different ways, but I find that this current setting is most practical. You've got the time, battery level, signal strength, plus icons to indicate missed calls or unread notifications. I think the other display types, I think one is just a full screen time, which is slightly enlarged, or I believe there's another one that might have the date but then doesn't show the different status notifications. I know that I mentioned previously in the earlier videos that I thought that the battery was perhaps a bit lacking, but now I've found it to be much longer lasting, in fact. I could be wrong, but I suspect that my earlier experience may have been hampered by the crippled network connection, which could have been maybe using extra energy as it was continually looking for a stronger signal. I'm not entirely sure, but that's the only thing I can really think of. They were both new phones, so there should have been no degradation of the quality of the battery itself. This time around, however, it's actually been very, very good. I've even used it for multiple hours of driving, utilising the GPS, as well as other daily usage, some videos, maybe some podcasts, all whilst never running out of charge. I would have to be doing quite a lot with this phone for a considerable period of time to actually run it out. So if you're curious about that, yes, the battery life is quite good. An added feature that I didn't realise until after using this for some time was actually in the way that you hold it. Whether you're still young or perhaps starting to suffer from neck and back pain, like I am in my older years, it's best to not have your neck tilted down looking at the phone in your lap. So with the phone shaped as it is, due to how you're likely to hold it from the bottom half, it now puts the screen a good few inches higher than what most other phones would normally be in this position. Normally you'd be holding the phone between your hands, but because you're holding it down here, it puts the screen up higher. It's especially good for video calling. Rather than people looking up your nose, it puts the camera at a much more flattering angle, more closer to the front of your face. And also, even when I was using a regular phone to try to avoid my neck being tilted down so far, I would hold the phone up higher to try to get that desired angle. But then doing that, your arms tend to get a bit more tired if it's for any prolonged period. So with this, it's a bit more of a comfortable position to have your hands a little in front of you, but not fully up. Plus it's not such a heavy phone as well. So for numerous reasons, that's quite good. Looking back at the physical buttons, in addition to the super handy shortcut buttons, it also features a dedicated clear or delete button. It's Japanese, but it says clear. The F22 Pro was missing this button. So if you needed to delete a character, you actually had to rely on the touchscreen to go back to delete that character or word, which kind of felt like it defeated the whole purpose of having physical buttons in the first place. Yes, the new T9 app that I'm using now, which is called TT9, does have the ability to remap certain keys. And I had also first tried that on the F22 Pro. And while that would provide a solution, such as I believe I mapped it to this, I think it's a menu key up in the top left there, it still wasn't really the perfect solution for the F22. Also, I will note that I changed from the earlier old T9 app that I first featured in the earlier videos, as this new app provides more options overall and just feels leaner, cleaner, and best of all, it is entirely free, whereas the other old T9 app did actually require payment for certain features. So I highly recommend that app for anybody using a physical keyboard on their phone. Also, whilst the F22 Pro does feature call and reject buttons, the reject or the hang up button behaves a bit differently on this phone. It's actually also a standby button. So there were many times where I was trying to close an app or hang up on a call, but all it would do is put the phone into standby. The call would remain active, so you've then got to wake the phone up out of standby, put your code in, and then navigate to the app using the on-screen button to hang up the call, and it just all felt a bit clunky. So the Mode1 Retro 2 overcomes any of these problems. The red button actually hangs up on calls. I believe I made mention earlier of the F22 Pro not having a fingerprint scanner, which after getting used to having one for many years now on other phones, honestly does feel like an unnecessary step backwards. For as much as I do enjoy throwbacks to older phones and such, even the cheapest phones these days have a fingerprint reader, so it kind of feels like there's no excuse to not really have one. So the Retro 2 featuring one very much is a welcomed addition. It's just so much quicker and easier than having to enter a code or a pattern every single time you need to access your phone. It's a first world problem, yes, and it just doesn't seem necessary at all, to be honest. On that same note, while the internal storage on most phones these days is more than sufficient for most people, I stand by the belief that you can never have too much storage. Whether that be for music, photos, videos, or even some larger apps, with a minute physical size of micro SD cards, there really is no excuse for any phone or tablet not to provide this method of storage expansion. We all know the real reason why the bigger companies do this, and it's purely for profit's sake. The premium they charge for internal storage, basically is criminal. So for the Mode1 Retro 2 to feature a micro SD card slot, which is shared with the SIM tray, I really do appreciate this. I've currently got a 256GB card in here, and it works flawlessly. I touched on the external screen earlier, which I found actually has a handy extra use. To manually activate the outside screen, all you need to do is tap one of the volume buttons. This of course isn't the hidden feature, but what is how it's just bright enough to be a super handy nightlight. If you're anything like me and you often go to bed after everybody else has, it's not really fair to come into the bedroom with a super bright torch engaged, risking waking the sleeping wife and being on the receiving end of her sleepy yet grumpy wrath. But the subtle light emitted from the external screen, believe it or not, is just enough to see your path to bed. Likewise, if you're already in bed and need to check something nearby, it's the ultimate torch shortcut command that doesn't require you to open the phone and suddenly be overwhelmed with a bright screen or notifications and other distractions. Again, this is a big part of why I chose this phone, to eliminate and/or at least reduce distractions from the digital world. This is just another great example of how this phone continues to serve this purpose. A couple of little things I will mention. Initially, I had turned off screen rotation. as many times when I brought the phone out of standby, it's not doing it now, make a liar of me, it would have a bit of a heart attack where it would first go into landscape and then change into the desired portrait orientation. I can't even do it now if I'm trying. But what I found soon was that the problem wasn't the phone, it was me. I think I must have been holding the phone, or maybe it was the state that it was in previously, I don't recall. Either way, it would sometimes first be in landscape and then immediately switch into portrait, which sort of slowed things down for that extra second or so. Which again, first world problems, not a major hassle, but I very quickly realised all I had to do was just be a bit more aware, holding the phone a bit more upright, and then immediately it would go into portrait mode, not switch from landscape into portrait. It's a small thing, just in case anyone has used this phone and they're finding that that is happening. It's not the phone, sounds like an old Apple excuse, it's not the phone, it's you. But really, it's just a matter of all you're doing is probably holding the phone on an angle. So perhaps this is just a matter of the gyro sensor being a bit more sensitive on this phone, whatever, but it was easily overcome by me just being a little more conscious of my own holding habits. Now, one thing that has been a genuine minor inconvenience is the sometimes erratic behavior of specific buttons when inputting text via the keypad. At first, it occurred with the number 2 button, where when you pressed it, it would sometimes action multiple presses. So if I'm trying to write a word that contains a letter from the key press from number 2, it would sometimes register 2 or 3 presses from a single press, totally mucking up the word that you're trying to spell. So then you'd have to go back, correct the word, and re-enter it again. So now, thankfully, that problem on the number 2 key seems to have corrected itself, but it has just started to show up on the number 4 key. My hope, based on the earlier problem and the eventual correction of number 2 key, is that it's just a side effect of the mechanical switch settling in, shall we say. I'm reasonably confident that it is hardware related, as it does occur with other keyboard apps too. It's not a deal breaker, as it's not always happening, but it is admittedly frustrating when it is happening, and it causes you to have to go back and correct numerous times. So I hope that that will correct itself in the near future. Aside from this though, I've had no problems with the phone, at least since changing my service provider. That was the big thorn in the lion's paw this whole time. But we're good now, and I couldn't be happier. And just a quick look and comparison, I managed to track down one of my most fond devices of yesteryear. This example came all the way from, I believe it was Switzerland of all places. The Sony Ericsson P900. This beauty was the absolute bee's knees back in, I think, 2003 or whatever it was when it came out. So we've got touchscreen, physical keyboard, status LEDs in the corner here, buttons, toggles, all sorts of good stuff. So many of the things that I find so attractive about the Mode1 Retro 2. Perhaps we'll take a closer look at this phone in the future. To be honest, it probably deserves a whole video of its own, but that will be for another day. This channel certainly wasn't planned to only be about mobile phones. It's just how it's happened to start out. There will be many other things that I'll be looking at in the future. Again though, thank you very much to everybody who has so very, very patiently waited for me to provide my follow-up video in what unintentionally became somewhat of a series dedicated to the Mode1 Retro 2 mobile phone. In short, yes, if your intentions and expectations are similar to my own, I really think that you would value a device like this in your own life. It really is such a cool device. I eagerly look forward to seeing how they revise a third iteration of this phone in the future. But for now at least, I'm perfectly happy continuing to use this phone as my sole mobile phone device. I've now confidently shed the literal size, weight, and the mental burden that comes from possessing significantly larger screens that are basically just synonymous with almost every phone that we see today. And I couldn't be happier for it. It really is, in many ways, quite honestly, life-altering for the better. So until next time, which at this stage is likely going to be a video demoing Panasonic camcorder, a modern one, actually, in fact, one I'm recording with today. But we'll see when that one comes about, hopefully not too far away. So until then, thank you for watching, and I look forward to posting a video again much sooner than what it took me to put this one together. But you know the drill. Work, life, family, it's not always easy finding time. So until then, take care, and I'll see you soon.